Hello and welcome back, and that's right, today I want to talk about this. This is the Terramaster F2-212, but more than that today, I want to talk about the subject of cheap NASes. NASes easy on the old budget. NASes where you want to get your own server and you don't want to put all your stuff in the cloud, do you? But you don't want to spend any money, do you? You want to go budget, you want to go value, you want to go lowest price to get a decent amount of stuff. And that's what today's video is pretty much about, because this is Terramaster's value series entry. They're not the first brand to do that, and they're certainly not going to be the last. And with the 2023 generation 2 bay, the F2-212 arriving at about 169 nicker for a 2 bay network attached storage device with a quad core based processor, a gig of memory, and all of the apps and services that you're probably going to want from a modern NAS on day one, that sounds pretty reasonable. However, if we look at their competitors and we look at brands like Synology and QNAP, you'll know that they also have a value tier. In another video, we will of course be doing a comparison between these more directly, but Terramaster aren't reinventing the wheel here. If anything, a lot of what they're bringing to the table we've already seen. In the case of the Synology DS223J, this was released around about 3.5–4 months ago, depending where you are in the world, and this knocked around for about 179 to 189 quid, only about 10 or 20 quid more. And if we look at the QNAP arriving at 199 quid for the 2 bay model of this, the TS233, and although that is a price increase of about 30 nicker, it does have 2 gig of memory instead of 1 gig, so very early doors. When we see this NAS and go, whew, that is cheap, it's worth highlighting that it's pretty much within the remit of what we expect from devices at the entry level of NAS these days. So what is it about this device here that's going to make it stand out? So let's crack on, but let's see what we get for our money, right? Let's unbox this bad boy. It's arriving in their kind of new cardboardy pop boxing there. I quite liked the blue one. It was a bit dated, but you know, that's just me. So have a little look what we get. Inside, we've got our box of accessories there. We have a little look. We have got our PSU, and the first thing, of course, it's got a kind of block PSU there. So again, rather than kind of laptop block that goes in with an external 3-pin adapter, this is straight into that, much like a lot of value series NASes. On top of that, we've got a Cat 6 cable here. Again, this is a 1 gig Ethernet NAS. More on that later on. But again, fairly high quality cable. I'll give them credit for that. We've got screws here for 2.5-inch and 3.5-inch media. We've got the stickers that I never quite understand what to use them for. We have got information on the warranty from the brand. This device arrives with 2 years of warranty. Again, pretty standard for a value series NAS from any brand. We've got first time setup instructions and links to guides online. So that is our accessories. So let's get those in the box and move them off cam. And have a look at the device. So inside, that's pretty much it. Packaging's fairly standard. You know, it's very hard to balance between sustainability and protection on these devices. It's unpopulated though, so I think there is a line. But one thing I will highlight, and something you may already know if you're someone that's followed this brand for a while, they have changed up some of their chassis recently, and this is one of the first to see it. This is the new Terramaster chassis, and you know, I think a lot of users are going to draw comparisons for what Terramaster's going for the look of this chassis versus that of the Synology 2 bays that we've got here. There is similarities I should say, and comparisons that can be made. But it's not a terrible looking chassis. We'll talk about that later on, because there's one thing we've said about Terramaster for a long time. It is they tend to look at what the bigger brands are doing and attempt to emulate that in a more cost-effective way. Now, whether you see that as a good thing or a bad thing, chasing market leaders or just trying to recreate stuff that's already out there, that's really a decision for you to make. But at least in terms of value for money, on a value tier, what you're getting in the hardware package here, at least at a casual glance, is pretty much the same as what they're offering right now. But let's talk about the design of this chassis and see if there are marked improvements or downgrades between this and previous value series NAS. So straight away, I'm going to say it. I really like the design of this chassis. When I said that it has striking similarities to that of Synology chassis there, I think that was a fair statement to make, and I didn't mean it as much of a dig. But what I will say is they have kind of borrowed or homage, whatever way you want to do it, some of the design choices of both Synology and QNAP. Synology's more recent releases have gone for this kind of rounded shape here all the way along, and they've kind of maintained those less stark edges when the previous generation of Terramaster 2 bays arrived in a slightly more dated package. I think a lot of users have moved away from that 2000 chic plastic silver, and they've gone for those curvy edges there on the chassis of the Terramaster all the way around. I would argue this is a lot easier on the eye for most users who are looking at it. But what I will also add is what they've emulated, if you will, there's that word again, from the likes of Synology. For a start, they've got that ventilated logo panel there on the side. Now, this isn't a huge advantage, but it does bring a lively bit of passive airflow into the active airflow of the rear fan there. Now, that goes all the way on both sides, and then on the base of the system, we've got additional ventilation, again, not dissimilar to that of Synology and QNAP. So, when you compare this chassis with the previous chassis, things have changed a lot. Yes, they're both 2 bays and the placement is largely the same, but one of these looks a lot more dated than the other, and I think you know which one that is. Now, when it comes to the tray definition there, I'll say between the two of them, let's remove that off camera. When it comes to where the trays are based in this, one thing that I did find slightly counterintuitive was removing those. At first I thought these were slottable trays there, much like you would see in a Drobo chassis, but no, these are trays. And again, you don't tap there at the bottom, there is no button. You've got to go from the top, push it down and remove that tray. You see, push from the top, pull from the bottom. I'm not hugely in love with that, I'll say. It is spring loaded ever so slightly, but not loads, and the trays themselves are, you know, I would argue slightly better than the ones that came before it. It's spring-loaded. They're not lockable, which I've got mixed feelings about, but this is a value series device. If we remove both of those trays there, we can see a nice clean interface as we would expect to those SATA connectors all the way along. We have got pin LED lighting there at the bottom, but not vastly more than that. We've got power, we've got drive activity, and that's really it. I can't find one for network activity, and although obviously there's going to be LEDs on that Ethernet port there later on, I wish there was a little bit more note of activity there. And plus, of all the things that I kind of hoped they would adopt if they're going to change up the chassis, would have been a front-mounted USB. 'Cause that's one thing their chassis designs have lacked for an exceptionally long time. And for the sake of convenience, having a front-mounted USB port, particularly for a home user, for a drop and go, is very, very useful, and something I've always wondered why they've never embraced. But the trays themselves, click and load in design. We've got screw holes there for 2.5-inch media, and of course, if we remove the sides, we can pop in 3.5 drives very, very easily. Now, when it comes to compatibility on this system, not only have Terramaster got their own fluid RAID system, more on that later on for good and for bad, but on top of that they also have a much broader compatibility list than most. On the compatibility list of this device, they support up to those 22 TB drives, which may seem madness when you're looking at 169 NIC and NAS, but nonetheless there aren't really restrictive limitations to the hard drives you can use. The compatibility list is pretty darn broad there. Again, on top of that, in terms of 2.5-inch drives, everything's got to be SATA. This system does not have any kind of M2 NVMe bays inside. Even if it did, I can't imagine the CPU that we'll talk about later on could really take advantage of that. There is support of hot swapping there. Now, normally, I wouldn't give a NAS brand too much kudos on their usage of hot swapping there, because I think that's a fairly standard practice. But remember earlier in the video when I pulled up the Synology value series device and the QNAP value series device? Did you notice? No hot swapping. Both of these systems in the value series do not have hot swapping there. It's a very small feature, and it's not one that's ever going to make or break the budget. But remember, there's only about somewhere between 10 and maybe 30 nicker difference between those and that. But value series NAS devices, you would be surprised how rarely they have hot swappable base. And when it comes to having one drive failure, when you're slightly panicked about turning a device off and you want to introduce a new drive, that might be quite desirable to some of you. Yes, this is a 2-base, so it can't really take that much advantage of the fluid rate system, but at least in terms of design and aesthetics, I really like it. And if we look at the ports and connections on this device, well, they're not going to blow you away. Let's be honest, it's a value series NAS. We weren't really expecting this to fly to the moon and back, but still, in 2023, I'm starting to feel that even value series NAS should have more than 1 gig. At least give me 2 LAN ports for a failover, or at the very least give me a single 2.5G port there. Now, there may be chipset limitations. I don't think there is. I have seen this CPU on a 2.5G system, but it's not the end of the road. This system does arrive, although with one fantastically boring USB 2 port, not really bothered about that one. There is a USB 3.2 Gen 1 port there, but that means not only can you use, expandable storage USB drives there, but the system also supports 2.5G upgrades over USB. These $15 to $20 upgrades. That means that yes, the baseline memory on this is pretty, the baseline network connectivity on this is pretty pants, but it's not the end of the road. And the way that you can go ahead and add 2.5G to this, therefore adding another 250 megabytes per second transmission externally, is going to be desirable for some of you out there. It doesn't have any KVM support there, doesn't have any HDMI or anything like that, and that CPU is nowhere near 10 gig USB. But it's nice to have that as an option, and the money you might be saving on the other device, you could get a couple of these and knock yourself out to have a 2.5G network connection with this. I will also add that despite my consistent checks, and I was going to grab it there, but that's for another video, I couldn't find out how well this deals with their own range of expansion devices. They started rolling out a lot of USB DAS boxes, JBOD, and some hardware RAID enabled, but on their specifications I couldn't get clear indications whether this supports expansions. Now, that again, not a huge deal breaker on a value series NAS. Most users that are looking at a device like this, expansion's very far away into the future, and if ever they go down the road where they're looking to expand and they've had it for a few years, chances are they're just going to buy a bigger NAS. Now that would be where that flexible RAID system comes in, but we'll get onto that later on. For now, let's talk about the internal hardware of this device and talk about what exactly keeps this thing ticking over. Now, to make my billionth comparison to other value series NASs in the market right now, this system from Terramaster, the 212, is arriving with the same CPU as their competitors at Synology and QNAP. That is the Realtek RTD1619B, a lovely little 1.7 gigahertz ARM-based processor that's 64-bit architecture there. That means you have got access to 4K transcoding on a slightly lesser degree of HEVC if it's supported on your native client devices. On top of that, you're not going to get virtualization, you're not going to get heavy hitting appliances, but you are going to have access to a lot of the base level stuff that you're going to be interested in. But just bear in mind that there is going to be a finite ability for this device because it arrives with 1 gig of DDR4 memory. Now, 1 gig's a decent number, again, 169 nick, not too shabby when you think of this as a turnkey hardware software combined solution, but it can't be upgraded. You can't go beyond that, which is going to be a shame because TOS 5.1 that runs on inside is going to be using a decent amount of that memory just to run its baseline operations, and everything you do on top is going to be using that minimized quantity of available memory there once you've got the baseline operations running. Its intelligent caching in TOS isn't quite as good as Synology's. It's on par, maybe with ASUS ADM, and they've done some great stuff with the online kernel when you're accessing it in the browser to feel a little bit more responsive, but that 1 gig of memory may appear something of a bottleneck to you. And remember, there is no support of M2s on this device either, so SSD caching is off the table as well as M2 SSD storage pools. Overall, when it comes to the internal hardware in this, there isn't really anything that's going to blow you away. The main change in that CPU chassis and Terramaster embracing that current gold standard of value series NASs is good on its own, but it's not really going to knock your socks off. But what about TOS? Let's face it, this device isn't just hardware. It's not just a 24/7 calculator. This is a system that not only allows you to take advantage of some third-party OSs via USB, bear in mind ARM processor gonna have your limits, but on top of that, it is a system that arrives with TOS, their own operating system. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the features and services that this includes and what percentage that seemingly makes up out of that 169 nicker. Now, considering Terramaster is, and let's be realistic here for a second, is by no means the market leader when it comes to NAS, their software has come forward leaps and bounds. I always consider them the kind of fastest evolver in NAS software, at least in terms of turnkey, because although they lack a lot of the AAA stuff that the contemporaries at QNAP and Synology feature, the baseline stuff they've embraced incredibly speedily. We mentioned it earlier, T-RAID, a flexible RAID system that allows you to mix and match your drives with other capacities in order to create single RAID environments with mixed drives. That is something Synology introduced with hybrid RAID, and something you can now get on a Terramaster. Can't get on a QNAP, weirdly. But yes, this is a 2-base. You're not really going to be able to realise that. But thanks to online migration and the ability to move drives over to larger Terramasters, that mixed RAID setup in a fluid RAID system can be quite useful. On top of that, support of BTRFS, much like Synology, is on this, as well as choosing between that and ext4. And the benefits of BTRFS for lower resource consumption during snapshot creation, shared folder recreation, and checksums and checks of data as it passes through to check for inconsistencies in that data before it's written long-term and in an archival sense. It's nice to have that option built in with BTRFS on this value series NAS. Then you've got support of snapshots, not only internal snapshots, but snapshot remote storage as well onto another third-party server. And again, those snapshots can be created on your own retention policies, on your own scheduled policies, as well as support of things like CloudSync and TerraSync as well. And they're even working on DuperSync as well, which allows you to have the site-to-site backup, NAS to cloud, NAS to NAS, NAS to USB, and all of the different variants of data protection built into it with those first-party apps. There was a while, 24 months ago, where their range of first-party apps was actually quite unsatisfactory, and they've really brought it forward. That said, there are glaring holes in that portfolio. Even running on this ARM-based system, so we're prepared to let it go, that things like virtualization isn't going to be an option, and their short-lived support of their surveillance platform, which seemingly has kind of gone away. I don't know if it's gone into forced retirement or it's an application that was never really able to run as good as they hoped it would and it's been retired. Who knows? But things like the media server applications for UPnP and just a general remote access for media, it's very rudimentary on this. They've got their own AI photo recognition tool in the shape of Terra Photos, but looking at their specification sheets, this device doesn't fully support it, which is going to be a real bummer, given that AI photo recognition is supported on that Realtek platform for both QNAP and Synology there. They do have support of Docker on this device, which is good, but when you've only got 1 gig of memory to play with, you're going to be feeling the limits of that a little bit. And when it comes to mobile apps, they've got a constantly improving mobile application and a vastly improved recently desktop application that allows you to interact with the NAS and do file checks and set up remote drives and checking out system health and that. But that's really it. They don't really have the full gamut of applications that you find on some of their competitors. Ultimately, what I'm saying is, When it comes to the baseline stuff, if you want to access your files via the web browser, if you want to stream media in a nice, easy way, or you want to be more reliant on third-party tools with the Terramaster NAS acting as a target drive, this is really going to work for you, because in that sense, this is considered a clean slate NAS with the baseline applications included, but everything on top of that, you can go third-party and integrate your own third-party services towards this. When you look at brands like Synology, where because they roll out a lot of their own first-party tools, they end up getting preference within DSM. So you may find, such as utilising their photo application, that you hit walls from time to time despite its abilities. And the Terramaster, more affordable NAS platform there, for its limitations, does give you a more open playing field of what you want to do with your data. Just bear in mind that that software is not as smooth or as consistent as Synology or QNAPs. Now, I'm going to be running Plex Media Server test on this, and we're currently working on our TOS 5.1 before you buy massive review, just like we did with the other NAS brands recently. However, I think I'm going to have to review TOS 5.1 on this in a separate video and a value series, because we still don't know what isn't available in TOS on this that you do get on the more premium devices from Terramaster, which are more Intel powered. But nevertheless, I like what they've done with improving this chassis. I think it's definitely a big step forward. And yes, we can argue where they got the ideas for a lot of this choice of design may have come from elsewhere, but that's not always a bad thing. Market leaders will tend to shape the narrative and shape the way forward on a lot of industries, and just because everyone behind them follows what people want doesn't make it a bad thing. I'm not sure I like these trays. I wish they were openable at the bottom. I know it's a small annoyance, it's very petty, but in every other regard I like this design, and I can add 2.5G if I need it. Overall, in terms of affordability, yes, the margin of price difference between it and Synology and QNAP isn't that much, but when you're looking at a value series device, that 10, 20, 30 quid, that might add a terabyte or two to your storage. That might be money that you're looking to spend on an upgrade. Maybe you were already stretched to the breaking point looking at this NAS in the first place, and that money difference is real-time money difference to you. And don't forget, Terramaster is a brand that often engages with seasonal sales like your Black Fridays, your Prime Days, your New Year's, your Boxing Day, and you will see discounts. So don't be surprised if you see this knocking around for a good 20, 30 nicker cheaper any month along the way. So ultimately, I like it. I do like it, but it's the limitations that it may bring in terms of keeping it value with things like the lack of a memory upgrade that might put you off. Things like the 1 gig by default, the lack of M2 NVMe slots, the fact that TOS may feel inconsistent sometimes when you use more polished, expensive platforms. But as a value series device, I think it's a very confident step from the brand to remain within that structure. But what do you guys think? There should be a written review below that will also add all the parts of the software portion of this review that will be coming after this. Let me know what you think. Are you a Terramaster user? Have you never really been drawn to the brand? Or did you use them and liked it or dislike it? I just want to know. Let me know in the comments, because we're one of the few channels that really talks about the brand more than anyone else, and I get why some people might not want to talk about them that much, given they are considered the budget end of the NAS market, but nevertheless they do provide a valuable area of the industry for those that are just not exactly rolling in it. Let me know what you think. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this. Check out the written review and the guides and the comparisons coming soon. And apart from that, I will see you next time.